Hello everyone, welcome back to Grey Brick Creations. My name is Michaela and today I'm going to be embroidering some sweatshirts for my girls. I'm going to be taking a plain gray sweatshirt that I bought from my local craft store and I'm going to be embroidering some pink flowers on it. So come along with me to see how they turn out. To start this project out, I actually drew some cute little flowers on my iPad and then I transferred them basically just to a Word document and then printed them out on some water-soluble sticker paper that I'm going to stick onto the sweatshirts. Since I knew I was going to be making 2 sweatshirts, I went ahead and just printed out quite a few of these little flowers on one piece of paper, and then I proceeded to cut them into individual flowers so that I can place them where I want on the sweatshirt. After using my paper cutter to cut out the big chunks of the flowers, I went through and just trimmed off some corners so that I didn't have quite as much of that water-soluble sticky paper on the sweatshirt. Now that I have a bunch of little flowers all cut out and separated, I'm going to get them placed on each sweatshirt. For this specific design, I wanted to place a few of the flowers up kind of in the shoulder corner area of the sweatshirt, and then I'm also going to place some on each sleeve of the sweatshirt towards the bottom of the sleeve. I wanted these flowers to be placed just randomly with some nice spacing in between each one, kind of closer together up by the collar, and then kind of getting farther apart as they move down the sweatshirt. After placing the flowers up by the collar, I went ahead and put some flowers down on the sleeves of the sweatshirt. I just did 4 flowers on each sleeve. I didn't want a whole lot to be on the sleeves, but just enough to make it kind of cute and tie it all together. That I have all the flowers placed, it's time for my favorite part of the project, which is picking colors. Originally, I was thinking about doing some pinks and purples. Obviously, I have 2 girls, so pink is their favorite color, so I went ahead and just did light pink and dark pink, and then the center of the flowers is going to be the black. Now I'm ready to actually start embroidering this project, so I went ahead and got one of my smaller hoops and placed it at the top of the sweatshirt so that I could embroider a little bit easier on this section. To start it out, I went ahead and did some French knots with the black. Here I'm using 2 strands of floss and just going through and filling that center area of each flower with the French knots like I mentioned earlier. When I first started the flowers, I was thinking about doing each flower, like the center of the flower and then the outside of the flower at the same time. But then I realized since I already had the black floss out that I should just do all the centers with the black, and then I'll go back and do each individual color, starting with the light pink as you can see here, and then do all the light pink flowers, then go back and do all the dark pink flowers. I also had these spaced out a bit more when I originally printed the flowers, but once I started stitching them in, I realized that that was going to look really bare, so I added basically like a flower petal in between each one that I had originally printed. You can kind of see those details here. I added the dots just to make sure I was a bit more centered when adding in those petals that aren't shown on the pattern. After wrapping up all of the light pink flowers, I went ahead and pulled the hoop out that I was using, and I'm going to start working on some of the dark pink flowers. So here you can see I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to stitch in the flower petals that are shown on the pattern, but then I'm also going to add in a flower petal between those to give it a more full flower look. After finishing up the dark pink flowers around the collar of the sweatshirt, I went ahead and started on the sleeves. The way I decided to do the sleeves was one sleeve would have all dark pink flowers, and then the other sleeve will have all the light pink flowers. And for these ones, I went ahead and did just do the flower petals that were shown on the pattern. I wanted to have a little bit more space between these so that they looked a little bit different than the flowers up around the collar. Another reason that I only did the flower petals shown on the pattern was because it was pretty hard to stitch on the sleeves of these sweatshirts. I did not anticipate the sleeves being so small and having to stitch inside the sleeves. I did try using one of my smaller hoops to just create like a flatter surface to stitch on and create some tension on the material, but then it was hard because the back of the sleeve was like right up against the part of the sleeve that I was stitching on, and there were multiple times where I accidentally stitched the back part of the sleeve into the front part of the sleeve that I was stitching the flower onto. So yeah, that's why I did a little bit less stitching on the sleeves of the sweatshirts, but in the end I think they turned out really good. If anybody has any suggestions on how to stitch on small sweatshirt sleeves, I am definitely open to suggestions. After finishing up the last few flowers on the sleeves of the sweatshirts, I was done with all the stitching, so now it is time to soak off that water-soluble sticky paper that the flower patterns were on. Since parts of the sweatshirt are probably going to get into the sink, I went ahead and cleaned my sink first just to make sure that none of the sink gunk got on my sweatshirts. And then after cleaning the sink, I made sure the water was extra hot and ran the pieces of the sweatshirt under the hot water and let that slowly dissolve the sticky paper that was under the stitching. As you can see here, the hot water really gets that sticky paper off pretty good. I don't see any remnants of it under the stitching. We will see how it turns out on the bigger flowers around the collar. Here you can see again, it looks like all that sticky paper is removed. Since these sweatshirts are for kids, I'm going to put some of the stitch stabilizer on the back side of the stitches just to make sure when the kids are taking them on and off, the stitches don't get pulled or accidentally ripped out. I haven't used this before, so I was reading through the instructions before getting started, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn the sweatshirt inside out so I can get this ironed on. Now I'm going to get my iron turned on, I'm going to get it set to the correct settings, and then I'm going to let that start warming up while I cut out the size and shape of this stabilizer that I'm actually going to need on the back of the sweatshirt. I just used a normal pencil to kind of trace out the shape I'm going to need in order to cover all those stitches. The instructions suggested 1 to 1/2 inch outside of the stitch for the length of the stabilizer, just to make sure it entirely covers the stitching on the back of the item you're making. Now I'm just going to go ahead and take my iron that's been heating up and press it onto the stabilizer and make sure it is nice and hot and stuck to the fabric. One thing I learned is that there is an edge on this stabilizer that will not stick to the fabric. I didn't realize that at first, so I'm gonna go ahead and get that edge that you can see didn't stick down when I did the ironing. I'm gonna get that cut off, and then I'm going to cut out a new section of stabilizer and get that ironed on, just to make sure that these couple flowers up here stay on and that the stitching doesn't get ruined. Also important to make sure you are putting the correct side of this paper down. As you can see here, I got in a little bit of a hurry and I didn't realize that I actually had it upside down. Luckily, I was able to flatten it out and get the correct side stuck to the sweatshirt here. Now this section's done. It looks like all the edges are stuck down pretty good. We'll see how it stands up. Next, I'm going to be putting some of the stabilizer on the sleeves. For this, I used a pen instead. It just seemed like it showed the outline better so that I could actually see where I was cutting. I wanted to make sure that the edges of the stabilizer stayed down, so I used kind of a sweeping motion with the iron to get those edges flattened out and stuck really good to the sweatshirt material. Here you can see me lining out the stabilizer for the other sleeve and then getting that iron down as well. The first sweatshirt did take a bit longer because it was a learning curve, but here you can see the second sweatshirt really went pretty quick and it wasn't too hard to get that stabilizer onto the sweatshirt. And here is how the sweatshirts turned out. Here I'm only showing you one sweatshirt, but they basically turned out exactly the same, so you can get a general idea of how both of them turned out. Here's the details on the sleeves, and then also the light pink flowers on the other sleeve can be seen here. Overall, I'm super happy with this sweatshirt. I'm interested to see how it holds up in the end after a few washings. Thanks again for watching.